it's 115 degrees. The air isn't a gas. It's a hot, wet cloth soaked in the stench of cordite, coral dust, and decaying flesh. You can taste it. In a jagged scrap of shade behind a bullet-pocked rock, a young Marine named Corporal John Jack Rhineland is being laughed at. Not a friendly chuckle. A harsh, desperate, cutting laugh from the other survivors of his scout sniper team. He's just unwrapped his new rifle from its long, cardboard shipping tuba package that arrived like a Sears catalog order. The weapon he pulls out looks absurdly delicate next to the standard issue M1 Garands. A Winchester Model 70-30-06 hunting rifle, with a commercial Lyman Alaskan 2.5x telescopic sight. Its polished woodstock gleams, a grotesque contrast to the matte, brutal utility of everything around him. What in hell is that, Rhineland? Gonna go bag a trophy buck? A haggard sergeant sneers, wiping sweat from his eyes. The Japs will hear you cock that thing and put one right between your horns. The criticism is sharp, born of fear and exhaustion. In the close-quarters jungle hell of Peleliu, the doctrine is volume of fire, spray and pray. The idea of a single, precise shot from a civilian rifle seems not just foolish but suicidal, a relic from a quieter world. But Jack isn't swayed. His hands, already calloused from weeks of fighting, move over the Winchester with a familiar reverence. This was his rifle. Back in Wisconsin, before the war, he'd stalked white-tailed deer in the silent, frozen woods. He'd learned patience. He'd learned to read the wind not as a force, but as a whisper. He'd learned to become part of the landscape until the shot was not a choice, but an inevitability. He'd tried to explain it to his superiors. He'd volunteered for this, pestering his command until they let him bring his own tool for a grim new trade. Now, holding it amid the scorn, the doubt is a physical weight. Is this arrogance? Or is it knowledge? The laughter dies as quickly as it started. A sharp crack splits the humid air, followed by a wet thud 30 yards away. A PFC, fetching water from the crater, drops silently. A single shot from an unseen ridge. Silence, heavier than before. Then, the dreaded sporadic ping of a Japanese Type 97 sniper rifle, a sound that pins men down, that paralyzes whole companies. The enemy sniper isn't just killing, he's controlling. He's a ghost in the coral, and he's just chosen this piece of hell as his domain. The sergeant looks from the dead Marine to Rhineland, then to the elegant, useless hunting rifle. The unspoken order hangs in the toxic air. All right, hotshot, you brought it. Prove it. Jack meets his gaze, his face unreadable. He nods once, a slow, deliberate motion. He chambers around. The metallic slide of the Winchester's bolt action sounds obscenely loud. To the others, it's the sound of a target painting itself. To Jack Rhineland, it's the only sound that makes sense. He turns toward the labyrinth of coral ridges, where a single, patient, professional killer waits. He will not be firing for volume. He will be firing for a verdict. Jack didn't move toward the ridge immediately. That's what they expected. The Japanese sniper, dug into some impossibly small spider hole in the coral, would be waiting for a head, a silhouette, a piece of fabric to betray a man's movement. Jack moved away. On his belly, he crawled not forward, but laterally, using a shallow draw littered with pulverized coral and the detritus of battle. The heat radiated up through his uniform, baking him. Every jagged piece scraped against skin already raw from salt and sweat. You can almost feel it, the grating agony of a slow, deliberate crawl when every instinct screams to run, to hide, or to fire blindly. He wasn't thinking like a Marine just then. He was thinking like he did on the Kickapoo River bottoms back home. You don't stalk a wary whitetail by walking up its trail. You circle downwind. You find where it should be, and then you find where it chooses to be. The coral ridges were his frozen woods. The sporadic ping of the Type 97 was the snapped twig. It took him 45 minutes to cover 150 yards. He found a position oblique to the suspected sniper's nest, a low, razor-sharp outcrop that offered not cover, but concealment. He became still, utterly still. In the jungle, movement is life. In the sniper's duel, stillness is godhood. He settled the Winchester's forend into a natural V in the coral, his cheek finding the familiar cool weld of the stock. He scanned through the Lyman scope. The world narrowed to a circle of magnified hell. Shattered rock, a discarded helmet, the bloated blackened remains of a previous fight. No obvious hole. No glint of glass. The Japanese were masters of camouflage. tying vegetation to their helmets and using the terrain itself as a bunker. Then, Jack saw it. Not the sniper, the absence. A faint, almost imperceptible wisp of smoke. No more substantial than a heat shimmer, drifting from a nearly invisible crevice 10 feet up the opposing ridge. A cooking fire? No, too small. The vent for a deeply dug position, possibly, or the faint residue of a recently fired cartridge. He adjusted, his breathing slowing. Inhale, exhale halfway. Hold. The crosshairs floated on the crevice. He was waiting for the shot, not his. The enemy's. The Type 97 fired again, aimed back at Jack's original company position. And in that instant, from the crevice, a tiny dark extension, a rifle barrel, withdrew back into shadow. There it was. The ghost had a lair. Now came the true test, the moment that separated a man with a scoped rifle from a sniper. The shot was a steep, uphill angle. He had to calculate the range by instinct, over 400 yards. He had to account for the strange superheated air warping the bullet's path. He had to aim not at the crevice, but at where the man's head would be when he cycled his bolt and prepared to shoot again. It was a prediction, a terrible gamble. Time stretched. The distant sounds of the main battle faded to a dull roar. The world was the circle of his scope, the sweat in his eye, the subtle pressure of his finger on the trigger. He was no longer Corporal Rhineland, he was a mechanism. A single focused intention. The dark slot in the quarrel filled again. A sliver of a face, one eye pressed to a scope. The Japanese sniper was searching for his next target, utterly unaware he was already in a crosshair. Jack's finger completed its rearward travel. The Winchester's report was different, sharper, cleaner than the Garand's, a single definitive statement. Through the scope he saw the coral around the crevice erupt into a pink mist. The rifle barrel slid out, then dropped, clattering down the rock face before catching on a ledge. It swung there, a silent, metallic pendulum. Back at the company line, the sergeant who'd mocked him hours earlier lowered his binoculars. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the man next to him and shook his head once. It wasn't an apology. It was the first page of a legend being written in coral and blood. One ghost had exorcised another. But on Peleliu, the ridges were haunted by more than one. The killing of the first sniper bought silence for his company, but not peace for Jack Rhineland. A new grim reality settled over the unit. The mockery was gone, replaced by a silent, expectant pressure. He was no longer just another Marine. He was a specialist. A tool. And on an island where Japanese snipers were costing dozens of lives and stalling advances for days, a tool is used until it breaks. Command gave him his orders. He was to operate independently. A free-roaming hunter. His mission was not to hold ground, but to clear the invisible, deadly impediments that infested the high ground. The ridges of Peleliu were a honeycomb of natural and man-made caves, and the enemy had turned them into a fortress of ambush. Every advance by the Marines was met not just with machine gun fire, but with that same chilling ping, a shot from nowhere, and a man dead before he heard the sound. So Jack began his solitary war. Before first light, he would sling the Winchester over his shoulder, fill his pockets with .30-06 cartridges, and melt into the tortured landscape. He moved with a predator's patience. He learned to read the coral like a map. A fresh scar on a rock face could indicate a recently opened firing port. A pile of rubble too neatly stacked might conceal an entrance. A faint, unnatural shadow at dawn could be a camouflaged observer. He became an archaeologist of death. When a Marine fell to a sniper, Jack would be brought to the area. He wouldn't look at the body, he would look past it. He'd trace the likely angle of the shot, reverse engineering the shooter's position. Where would he have set up? Where was the field of fire optimal? Where was the escape route? It was a brutal calculus, using a dead man's posture as the first variable in an equation whose solution was another man's life. The kills mounted. 2, then 4. Each engagement was a unique, terrifying puzzle. One sniper he caught while the man was relocating, a fleeting shadow between two caves. The Winchester's round took him in the upper back. Another, more patient, had tied himself into the crown of a shattered, denuded tree. Jack spent 3 hours in a shallow, sun-baked depression, letting the enemy believe the area was clear, waiting for the inevitable adjustment of a cramped leg or a shift of the rifle. When it came, the shot was less than 200 yards. A simple shot, an excruciating wait. He began to understand his enemy. They were not faceless. They were professionals. They were brave, disciplined, and mercilessly effective. In a strange, dark way, it created a perverse kinship. He respected them. And that respect made him more dangerous. He did not underestimate. He did not grow impatient. But the isolation was its own kind of weapon. There was no camaraderie in this fight, no shared burden. The rifle reports were solitary. The victories were silent, confirmed only by the cessation of fire from a distant ridge. The Marines he saved never saw him. They only knew the shooting stopped. He operated in a void between lines, a ghost fighting ghosts, his only company the weight of the Winchester and the growing tally in his mind. By the end of the third day, the number was 7. 7 expert marksmen removed from the battlefield. 7 pockets of paralyzing fear erased. The story was spreading through the ranks now, morphing with each telling. Mail-order rifle, they begun to whisper with a tone of awe. Ryman's got that mail-order rifle. Yet, with each ghost he laid to rest, the law of diminishing returns set in. The remaining Japanese snipers grew wiser to his methods. The engagements became longer, the shots more difficult. They were adapting to the hunter in their midst. And on the morning of the 4th day, Jack would face his most terrifying challenge yet. Not a single sniper, but a nest of them, coordinated, waiting. And they had drawn a bead on the one thing that could break his flawless concentration. Dawn of the 4th day bled a sickly yellow light over what the Marines had named Bloody Nose Ridge. Jack was stalking a new sector, a narrow, winding gorge that cut like a scar into the coral. Intelligence reported it was a main artery for Japanese movement, a highway for snipers to reach their forward hides. It was perfect ground for an ambush. For both sides. He'd chosen a high vantage point where the gorge forked, giving him a commanding view. For an hour, nothing moved but the flies. Then a flicker. A scrap of khaki cloth snagged on coral, fluttering where no breeze reached. It was fresh. Someone had passed recently in a hurry. He was adjusting his position for a better angle when the first shot snapped past, so close he felt the supersonic crack over his right ear. It wasn't aimed at him. It was a marker. The distinctive report of the Type 97 echoed up from the gorge floor. A second shot kicked up grit 6 inches from his rifle's forend. They weren't shooting to kill him. They were shooting to fix him. To make him freeze. His blood went cold. This was a drill. A drill he knew. Back in Wisconsin, his father had shown him how wolves would harry a deer, driving it toward a hidden member of the pack. He was the deer. He scanned frantically through the scope, not for a target, but for the trap. He saw it in a heartbeat. A primary shooter, well concealed in the shadows of the gorge's west wall, was the harrier. His job was to keep Jack's attention, to make him return fire and reveal his exact position. But the lethal shot would come from the other side of the gorge, a higher, secondary position with a clean angle into Jack's nest. They were working as a team. They had adapted. He couldn't engage the first shooter. That was the game. To win, he had to break the sequence. Another round whined off the coral an inch from his head. Shot stung his cheek. He didn't flinch. He held his breath, his mind racing over the geometry of the kill zone. The secondary shooter would be waiting for the muzzle flash of the Winchester. He would be watching this exact rock. Jack did the one thing instinct screamed against. He moved, not away, but up. In a low, explosive crouch, he scrambled 6 feet to his left, behind a thicker outcrop. It was a desperate gamble exposing himself to the first shooter for a full 2 seconds. A round chipped the coral where his head had been. Now, he was off the X. The trap was sprung on empty air. He pressed himself against the new rock, hard hammering against his ribs. The secondary shooter would now be confused, searching. He had to act before they recalibrated. He risked a glance with just his eye, not the scope, around the edge of the rock. He traced a line from his old position to the most likely spot for the second sniper. There. A deeper shadow beneath an overhang on the opposite ridge. A perfect, enfilading field of fire. He had no shot from here. He needed a new angle, and that meant descending into the gorge, into the kill zone. It was madness. It was the only play. Sliding back down the way he came, he moved with a controlled urgency, the Winchester held tight across his chest. The air in the gorge was stifling, thick with the smell of damp rot and something metallic. He could feel eyes on him. Every shadow was a threat. He found a position behind a collapsed boulder, halfway down the slope, looking up at the secondary sniper's nest. It was a terrible shot. Uphill, partially obscured by a lip of coral. He'd have maybe 3 inches of visible target. He settled in. The primary shooter, having lost him, had gone quiet. The silence was more oppressive than the gunfire. The secondary sniper would be patient. He would wait for the hunter to become the hunted again. Then, movement. A subtle adjustment in the dark slot of the overhang. A rifle's front sight post, edging out, seeking a target below. The man was shifting to cover the gorge floor. He was now perfectly silhouetted against the slightly brighter coral at the back of his hide. Jack's crosshairs found the center of the shadow. He exhaled, let the wobble settle. He squeezed. The report was deafening in the confined space. The silhouette jerked and collapsed inward. Immediately, a furious barrage erupted from the primary position across the gorge-blind, panicked fire. The Harrier, now alone, was terrified. Jack worked the bolt of the Winchester, the spent cartridge clinking on the rock. He didn't even need to aim the second shot. The muzzle flashes from the west wall were a beacon. He fired 3 times, rapid, controlled. The firing stopped. Silence rushed back in, ringing and absolute. He waited 10 full minutes before moving. When he cleared the positions, he found them. The secondary shooter, a lieutenant with an elaborate scope, and the primary, a young soldier with a face frozen in rage. Numbers 8 and 9, but the victory tasted like ash. They had worked as a team, they had learned, they had almost won. He slumped against the coral, the adrenaline drain leaving him hollow. The Winchester felt impossibly heavy. They were adapting faster. How many more traps were waiting? How long before his luck, or his skill, finally ran out? The answer would come before the day was done in the most sacred and violated of places. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows, turning the coral into a forest of jagged black teeth. Jack was exhausted, a deep weariness that went beyond muscle and bone, settling in the soul. 9. The number echoed in the quiet chambers of his mind. But the fight for the island was reaching a new peak of fury around the airfield, and the order came down. Advance and clear a series of ridges overlooking a shattered shell-blasted structure, the maps labeled simply as the chapel. It wasn't a place of peace. It was a strong point. Its thick coral block walls had withstood naval bombardment, and now Japanese machine gun and sniper fire poured from its crevices in a single skeletal bell tower. Every Marine who tried to approach the small open ground before it was cut down. The advance had stalled for hours, the cost mounting. Jack approached from a flank, using a ruined trench system. The scene before him was a tableau of stalemate. Bodies lay in the open, untouched. A medical corpsman's arm, still clutching a bandage, was visible behind a low wall. They couldn't even recover their dead. The fire was too precise, too disciplined. He set up at the extreme edge of effective range for the Winchester, nearly 600 yards from the chapel. Through the Lyman scope, the building swam in the heat waves. He wasn't looking for a man. He was looking for a pattern. He watched the murder holes in the walls. The dark slit of the bell tower. He timed the shots. The primary threat wasn't the sporadic machine gun. It was the sniper in the tower. He would fire once, sometimes twice, then disappear for long minutes, only to reappear and kill again. He was conserving ammunition. He was confident. He owned this ground. Jack's mouth was a dry line. This was the farthest shot he'd attempted. The calculus was terrifying. Bullet drop measured in feet, not inches. Wind drift amplified over the distance. The minute tremor in his own hands magnified into a miss. One shot. If he missed, the muzzle flash would paint his position, and every weapon on that chapel would turn on him. He made his adjustments, raising the aiming point until the crosshairs hovered far above the dark slit in the tower. He was aiming at empty sky, trusting physics to arc the bullet down into the void. He inhaled the stale, hot air, let half of it out, and became a statue. He waited for the ghost to show itself. Minutes bled away. The distant battle roared, but his world was the circle of the scope and the dark, vacant window. A flicker. The slightest suggestion of a shape filling the lower part of the slit. The Japanese sniper was edging back into position, his own rifle coming to bear on the pinned Marines below. Jack's finger took up the slack. In that infinite second before the break, a memory flashed, not of war, but of a frozen dawn in Wisconsin, his breath pluming, the crosshair steady on a buck that had no idea he existed. The same stillness, the same certainty. The Winchester roared, its sound swallowed by the larger battle. Through the scope, he saw a spray of coral dust and fragmented metal erupt from the inside edge of the slit. The shape in the window collapsed. Silence from the tower. Then chaos from the walls. The machine gunner, deprived of his overwatch, exposed himself to fire at the perceived threat. It was a fatal mistake. A Marine bar gunner finally found his mark, silencing the nest. The spell was broken. A ragged cheer went up from the Marine lines as they began to advance, recovering their wounded and their dead. No one knew where the shot had come from. No one saw the lone figure on the distant ridge, slowly working the bolt to eject the spent, smoking cartridge. Number 11. Jack didn't feel triumph. He felt a profound, hollow emptiness. He looked down at the Winchester. The polished stock was now scratched and dulled by coral. The barrel was hot to the touch. This instrument of his past life had just written its darkest chapter. He had done what they asked. He had broken the deadlock. He had saved lives, he supposed, in the most brutal arithmetic imaginable. 11 expert marksmen, 4 days. 1 mail-order rifle. But as he finally stood to withdraw, his body screaming in protest, a final chilling realization settled over him. In killing 11 ghosts, he had become one himself. He was no longer just Jack Rhineland from Wisconsin. He was the thing the others spoke of in low tones. He was the man with the rifle. A legend woven from coral dust and gun smoke, a story that would outlive the man who lived it. He slung the Winchester over his shoulder, its weight now a permanent part of him, and turned his back on the chapel, melting once more into the jagged, unforgiving landscape of Paleliu.